Imagine you're in the ICU. A critically ill patient is struggling to breathe. The oxygen saturation is falling, and the monitor alarms are sounding. What's the first instinct? Turn the oxygen up to 100%, right? But here's a question every doctor should ask: if oxygen saves lives, why don't we give 100% oxygen to every patient? To understand why 100% oxygen isn't always the answer, let's first see how oxygen is transported in our blood. Almost all the oxygen, about 98.5%, is carried by hemoglobin inside red blood cells. Only a tiny amount, around 1.5%, is dissolved directly in the plasma. Now here's the important part. Hemoglobin has a limited carrying capacity. Once it's nearly full, giving more oxygen doesn't significantly increase the amount it can carry. Think of it like filling a glass with water. Once it's full, pouring more water doesn't make the glass hold more, it simply overflows. This is exactly what the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve shows. In the beginning, as the partial pressure of oxygen rises, oxygen saturation increases rapidly. But after the partial pressure of oxygen reaches around 60 mmHg, the curve starts to flatten. Beyond this point, even a large increase in partial pressure of oxygen results in only a tiny increase in oxygen saturation. For example, increasing the partial pressure of oxygen from 100 to 200 millimeters of mercury changes the saturation by only about 2%, from roughly 97% to 99%. So, while the benefit becomes minimal, the risk of oxygen toxicity continues to increase. So, if extra oxygen doesn't provide much additional benefit, why can it actually become harmful? The answer lies in something called reactive oxygen species. These are highly reactive molecules that are produced when patients are exposed to high concentrations of oxygen for prolonged periods. Think of ROS like the rust that slowly damages iron. In our body, these molecules begin attacking healthy cells. They damage cell membranes, proteins, and even DNA, while also triggering an inflammatory response inside the lungs. As this injury progresses, the delicate alveolar capillary membrane becomes damaged, making it leaky and disrupting its normal function. At the same time, surfactant, the substance that keeps the alveoli open, begins to break down. Without enough surfactant, surface tension increases, making the alveoli unstable and more likely to collapse. High concentrations of oxygen also wash out nitrogen from the alveoli. Since oxygen is rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream, the alveoli lose their structural support and collapse, a phenomenon called absorption atelectasis. The result? Gas exchange actually becomes worse. So despite giving more oxygen, the lungs become less efficient at transferring oxygen into the bloodstream. In patients on mechanical ventilation, this injury can even worsen ventilator-induced lung injury. That's why oxygen should always be prescribed like any other drug. But does clinical evidence support this concept? The answer is yes. Several major clinical trials have compared conservative oxygen therapy with liberal, high-oxygen strategies in critically ill patients. The Oxygen-ICU trial first suggested that avoiding unnecessary hyperoxia may improve outcomes in ICU patients. Although the study had limitations, it challenged the long-held belief that more oxygen is always better. Later, the LOCO trial specifically studied patients with ARDS. It compared conservative and liberal oxygen strategies but was stopped early because of safety concerns. Most importantly, it found no evidence that routinely giving higher oxygen levels improved patient outcomes. When we combine these studies with our understanding of oxygen physiology, the message becomes clear. Two more landmark ICU trials further challenged the idea that giving more oxygen leads to better outcomes. The ICU-ROX trial compared conservative oxygen therapy with usual oxygen care in mechanically ventilated ICU patients. The result? There was no significant difference in ventilator-free days or mortality. In other words, routinely giving more oxygen did not translate into better clinical outcomes. The HOT-ICU trial looked at patients with acute hypoxemic respiratory failure and compared a lower oxygen target with a much higher one. Once again, aiming for higher oxygen levels did not improve survival. When multiple high-quality trials point in the same direction, the message becomes difficult to ignore. So what about children? Do the same principles apply in pediatric intensive care? The answer is yes. Although we have fewer randomized trials than in adults, the available pediatric evidence and current international guidelines point in the same direction. The LOCO₂ international consensus recommends that oxygen therapy should be individualized according to the child's illness. The goal is to avoid both hypoxemia and hyperoxia, reduce the FiO as soon as it is safe to do so, and always use the lowest FiO that provides adequate oxygenation. Observational pediatric studies have also shown that hyperoxia is associated with worse outcomes in several critically ill children. So, how do we apply all of this at the bedside? Here are some practical principles. First, on mechanical ventilation, always titrate the FiO first to achieve your target oxygen saturation. Once the patient is stable, reduce the FiO as early as possible and optimize other ventilator settings, such as PEEP, to maintain oxygenation. As a general rule, avoid prolonged exposure to an FiO above 60% whenever feasible. Before procedures like intubation or transport, pre-oxygenation is essential. However, remember that 100% oxygen is a temporary strategy, not a maintenance therapy. Once the procedure is over, de-escalate the FiO as soon as it is safe. After return of spontaneous circulation following cardiac arrest, target an oxygen saturation between 94 and 99%. Confirm adequate oxygenation with an arterial blood gas, and avoid both hypoxemia and persistent hyperoxemia. Patients with chronic hypercapnic respiratory failure require a different approach. Here, excessive oxygen can worsen carbon dioxide retention. In these patients, aim for an oxygen saturation of 88 to 92% and monitor blood gases closely. In patients with severe brain injury, preventing hypoxemia is critical, but hyperoxia should also be avoided. Target adequate oxygenation rather than excessive oxygen levels. Let's put everything we've learned into practice with a real ICU scenario. An 8-year-old child with moderate ARDS is mechanically ventilated. The child is hemodynamically stable, well sedated, and producing adequate urine output. Take a look at the ventilator settings. The FiO₂ is 100%, PEEP is 8 centimeters of water, and the latest arterial blood gas shows a PaO of 180 millimeters of mercury with an oxygen saturation of 99%. Now here's the question. What would you do next? Would you increase the PEEP, reduce the FiO₂ to 80%, increase the tidal volume, or leave everything unchanged? The correct answer is reduce the FiO₂. Why? Because this child is already more than adequately oxygenated. A partial pressure of oxygen of 180 millimeters of mercury indicates hyperoxemia, and continuing an FiO₂ of 100% provides virtually no additional benefit while increasing the risk of oxygen toxicity. The first step is to reduce the FiO₂, perhaps to around 80%, and then reassess the oxygen saturation and repeat an arterial blood gas if needed. The take-home message is, once adequate oxygenation has been achieved, the next step is not more oxygen, it's less.